to the Affinity Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about collecting and leveraging eNPS for a people-centric culture, mindful leadership, and talent development and retention. Hi, Grantley.
Hi.
Let's start by an introduction to eNPS and people-centric culture. Can you explain the concept of eNPS and what it stands for?
Yeah, so eNPS is the Employee Net Promoter Score, and this was built on the Net Promoter Score that Reichel brought out in the early 2000s. And the eNPS is a very powerful metric for measuring really team member engagement. When a team member says, and that's the question behind the eNPS, that they're happy to refer a friend or a family member or an associate to your business, that means that they are engaged and they actually like what you do or like what they do.
What are the benefits of eNPS for companies?
There's enormous benefits, and the numbers are pretty amazing, actually. When you look at the various numbers that are out there, there's going to be some referenced at the end of this podcast. But, one is, for example, and this is Gallup. So Gallup's a major resource for team member engagement surveys and study. But Gallup actually says that highly engaged employees outperform their competitors by 147% in earnings per share. That's a 2021 number. Pretty amazing sort of revelation. But if you go to things like, for example, turnover rates for team members can go down between 25 and 59%. Again, source was Gallup for that. And that's a pretty amazing number that you could reduce your team member turnover by 25 to over 50%, which is a huge ongoing benefit to the company from a training perspective, from a cost perspective, almost on every number, on every metric. Another one is absenteeism improves by around 41% and productivity by 17% in organisations that have a highly engaged workforce. And I could just go on and on, and you can see the stats at the end of this podcast. There's some really compelling metrics to suggest that having engaged team members makes sense, and being able to measure that makes even more sense.
Can you talk about building a people-centric culture? Your book, The Affinity Principle, its mantra, if you will, is people first always. Can you talk about your philosophy and your affinity formula? And this is the philosophy that all of this is built around.
Yeah, so the affinity formula is pretty simple, and for you guys that have been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll hear it once again. It's great leadership leads to a great team experience, which leads to a great member experience or customer experience, which equals financial results. So it's pretty simple. But what I've seen over the years is this formula works it's agnostic as to industry or application. If leaders are doing a great job, they're mindful in their role, thoughtful about what they do, that they do or partake in activities that help team members become engaged and prosper, then the byproduct of happy customers, happy members is inevitable. So we're all seeking financial results, but a lot of times we chase them through the balance sheet, and the balance sheet's a pretty hard way to do that. The problem with the balance sheet is simply that it's a retrospective look at what's going on in your company. Whereas when you look at eNPS and NPS, which is what Affinity OS measures, you're actually projecting out. You actually can look out as far as maybe 3 months as to what's likely to occur on your balance sheet. Having these proactive or prospective looks is very powerful, particularly when you have the ability to change course or redirect or do things that are necessary to push the numbers more in the direction you want them, which is obviously higher profitability.
What is the role of mindful leadership in talent development and retention?
Well, mindful leadership is really being conscious of what people's needs are, because we're talking about a people-centric organization, but people's needs are a function of the company, and meaning if people are fulfilled, they're engaged, and they're enjoying what they're doing, chances are they're going to be doing their job well, because people usually thrive in that space where they're doing something they really enjoy and they're well aligned with, and when there's a cultural alignment. So the mindful leader places or positions a company and their team members in a place where they can do their best work, essentially. It's pretty simple.
Let's talk about setting up an effective eNPS system. Can you talk about defining the purpose and objectives of your eNPS system?
Okay, so an eNPS system is measuring the team members, again, engagement, but the level of their affinity with the organisation, to coin a phrase. And to have a system to do that, you need to be rhythmic, so you need to do it consistently. And it needs to be done in a way that is both accessible, so team members have access to it, or it actually gets traction with team members. Importantly, it also needs the ability to be anonymous, and that's critical. And one of the things the Affinity OS platform does is give the option for anonymity. So a team member can speak their mind without fear of retribution. And that's a powerful shift, because most polling systems give or telegraph to the management or executive who the person is, and people are reticent to risk their livelihood in being truthful sometimes about what is or isn't working in the company. So the Affinity OS platform is designed to be that sort of perfect blend. And beyond that, it's designed to really understand the sentiment of what's being transposed or shared. And if truth is coming through, it's important to understand what that truth is and what it means to your organisation. And so the platform was designed to provide and perk to the top trends and sentiment, so that you can look over time at which direction you're headed, not just from an index standpoint, but importantly, what trends are becoming more prevalent, and are those positive trends or negative trends, and therefore what can you do about it?
How do you craft clear and concise eNPS survey questions?
So it's an absolute critical aspect of any surveying. I was in a company where we did an annual survey, and the survey was 3, 4, 5 pages long, a lot of questions, and it was a powerful survey, but there was a couple of things that I felt it failed at, and one was being succinct. People don't have a lot of time, particularly these days. Folks, want to get on with it. So if the survey takes just a few minutes, they probably will do it. But if the survey is going to take an hour, they're probably not going to do it. Other problem with that other survey was it's annual. So you're getting a data point once a year, or a set of data points once a year. To navigate in today's world, you need to be able to respond and be nimble almost instantaneously. So the right answer is succinct questions that are simply answered, and those need to be sent out or available to the team on a rhythmic basis. And we typically recommend every month that you poll your team member.
Can you talk about ensuring data privacy and confidentiality?
Yeah, again, critical. If people are going to give you anonymous feedback, you need to ensure that that's the case. And we've actually spent a lot of time and resources ensuring that the system does exactly that a person is not going to be flagged. Now, having said that, if you've got a very small company with very few team members, and somebody says something about their particular division, there's a chance that they're not going to be completely anonymous. We have found that Affinity OS is best used in a large organisation, or most valuable in a large organisation. I don't mean a massive organisation, but definitely one that has a greater breadth of team members. But the assurance of privacy is really critical. And the other thing, for me, even if I do recognise a team member through the eNPS system, through something they've said, I'm not going to flag that because I don't want them to feel exposed. And I certainly am going to try my best to ensure that that person feels that their privacy has been respected. So if they're commenting on let's say a manager or whatever, I'm definitely not going to let that manager know that they had said that. I would respect that anonymity as you would if you didn't know who they were.
Let's talk about analyzing and interpreting eNPS data. Can you help us understand eNPS scores and benchmarks?
Yeah, so benchmarks for eNPS are, typically much lower than you would think. And across industries, it varies significantly. If you're getting an eNPS number above 0, that's actually a good thing. It means more people like you than don't, or have an affinity than don't. Obviously, the higher you get, the better. And I've seen in certain industries numbers in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s. And typically in the organisations I've been involved with, I'm going to say expected to get in those, high 50s, 60s, and even 70s, because we're trying to create that environment where people do feel engaged and nurtured. But I would, on one aspect, say, don't put too much emphasis on the score. What I'm looking to do is move the needle. And so if we start and we're in the 60s, wow, that's amazing. But let's be pushing to get into the 70s. But most importantly, and probably the heart of the answer here is, it's honestly less about the numbers and more about the sentiment and the trends that get percolated up. And AI is one of those amazing resources that can do that in a way that is very difficult for a human to do, and particularly on volume. And the eNPS system, the AOS system, Affinity OS system, is most powerful over time. And that means an accumulation of a massive data set. And as the data set grows, the validity of the data gets improved, and you will find that there's an enormous shift in terms of your ability to see what's going on within your organization and your ability to respond and be nimble, as I said, in advance of that actually affecting your bottom line. It's absolutely critical. So what I encourage companies to do, and whether they use Affinity OS or they use another platform, is to not look at your numbers too soon. Wait until you get a true qualitative and quantitative data set. So about 3 months typically before you really start to see some trends and some things perk to the top. But again, if you're using AI, and that's what we use to do that, we can actually peel out some really, really great data points and even topics for us to be exploring.
Yeah. Can you go a little deeper into identifying trends, patterns, and areas of improvement, maybe even best practices, and how maybe the Affinity OS platform does that, and what you would be looking for and the benefits?
Yeah. So I'm looking for things that are prevalent, because I want to address the big stuff first. And those things that are prevalent, for example, let's say team members are saying that they don't think they're getting enough personal and professional development, then that's going to be relevant to how I frame what we do, the investment we make with team members. And in doing so, I'm going to then start implementing things that I feel can make a difference to that sentiment. And you can only do that by, again, watching the trends and ensuring that you've got your finger on the pulse. One thing, I'll just step back for a second. One important thing to understand, the goal of Affinity OS is to give you a simple dashboard, right? A dashboard to steer your ship or your business. And the beauty of that is to look at it over time, but not to have to dig too deep. Initially, you just look at the number and you can see the trend. And if something's shifting, let's say it's shifting in not a great direction, then to go down deeper and deeper. And so when a trend starts to occur, you'll usually see it in your top number, let's say in this case, eNPS, and trying to understand that means you do need to dig a little bit deeper. But most days, I look at the number and like everything's good and the world's moving in the right direction, and so I don't see that I need to make a lot of effort there. But when I do see a shift that I see as a pertinent trend to the ultimate success of the company, which ultimately, let's get down to it. We want to make a profit, and if we're going to be profitable, we need to have these forecasts to essentially steer the direction that we're going to take the company. So in Pracies, the trends that evolve through a system like Affinity OS, the eNPS system, are going to be what helps steer the direction of the leadership and the direction that the leadership takes the company over time. And it's compelling. It's compelling information, which I'm surprised often by how much it helps us direct our efforts. It's important.
Can you talk about segmentation and analysis by team, department, or demographic?
Yeah, so the data you have the ability to pass the data. So as simple as Affinity OS is at a glance, what we have is the ability to pull data out and put it into data sets and to pass that data. So to actually look at it through different frameworks and different matrices. And without getting into detailed explanations about the system, what I'd say is there's some very simple grids and charts that we employ to visually demonstrate what's going on and where maybe your priorities should lie. And I think what we might do at some point is do just a podcast on the system so that people can see what I'm talking about. But suffice to say, we've, much like the Affinity Principle, my book, been very visual in what we've done so that we're trying to make it pretty much paint by numbers is a good way to describe it. Yep.
Can you talk about leveraging eNPS data for strategic decision-making a little bit more?
Yeah, so in terms of leveraging the data, one of the things that we do is look at the data over time. And we, again, what we're trying to do is work out what's driving that number, and if it's not going in the right direction, what we need to change, and if it is going the right direction, how we might enhance that or build on that. So we're looking for best practices. One of the ways to do that, we have multi-sites, for example, that are clients. And across those multi-sites, you might see a very positive trend happening at a particular site. So you can peel that out, look at it, and go, okay, how can we apply this to other sites? And, there's always geographic differences and even leadership differences and team member blend differences. And there's a lot of different, elements to it. But the beauty of the AI system is it will perk the most relevant information to the top, and you can use that to go, okay, this is how we enhance the performance of the group, as opposed to just that one site that's benefiting from maybe a manager that's implemented something that makes a lot of sense and works.
Let's talk about integrating eNPS into mindful leadership practices. Can you talk about utilizing eNPS insights for self-awareness and self-regulation as a leader?
Yeah, so I look at the eNPS system routinely. So it's sort of a daily, I don't look at it as a chore. It's a daily rhythm that I have. And when I look at it, most times the score doesn't shift a lot. So I am going to look a little deeper. I use it to evaluate not just how the team's going and what the experience is within the team, but how I'm going as a leader or our group's going as a leader. One of the metrics is, do you feel that your leader is, or that you're trusted and you feel heard by your leader? And I think currently we're tracking at 9.8 out of 10, and that heartens me that I feel like the team's feeling that they're heard, respected, trusted. But what I am going to do is obviously stay tuned to that, because if that drops to 9.7, 9.6, 9.5, I've got a concern about that. And a lot of times, if I'm true to my word about the Affinity Principle, and I'm, in this case, the CEO of the company, the buck does stop with me. So if something's shifting, it's going to emanate from me on some level. And so that level of I'm going to say, awareness or that ability to be introspective is really important. So in answer to the question, the truth is anything that happens, anywhere that the eNPS number moves, I have to look within and go, how am I impacting that? And it may be by not doing something rather than actually doing something. So I think it's incredibly important for us as managers, leaders, using a system like this to not get defensive, but to look at it and try and look at it with very open eyes and be a little vulnerable when it comes down to the feedback you're getting.
Can you talk about encouraging open communication and feedback culture and the importance of that?
Yeah, so I've talked about this a lot over the time that we've been doing this podcast, and open feedback for me is communication. It's encouraging communication, and it's encouraging people to speak their mind. One of the things I talk about in the affinity principle is the boardroom, meaning when you've got a team of executives meeting and they're having a conversation, you want those executives or team members, or it doesn't matter what level it is, to be able to speak their mind. And to encourage that, you really need to not get defensive in those situations where maybe you disagree. You've got a right to disagree, but it's how you frame it. And it's also first seeking to understand, as Covey says. So where I'm coming from with this is if we actively encourage people to speak their mind, we're actually encouraging them sometimes to disagree with us. But when you do that, you create a communication platform that engenders trust. It also carries with it the authenticity, particularly if you're not reactive in a negative way. That to me is at the heart of growing a great organization. So I haven't spoken to that a lot, but you'll probably hear that more in future podcasts, just the fact that when somebody disagrees with me, my natural reaction is actually on the inside to applaud it because they're actually speaking their mind. It's very easy to get everybody to agree with you and force that sort of culture on people where if you don't agree, you're in trouble. But we talked about diversity in the previous podcast, and you don't get diversity of thought if you're expecting everybody to go, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. And diversity of thought is where the good stuff happens. That's where the unique breakthroughs happen, where the contradictions within industries occur that actually create growth within an organization or an industry that wasn't there before.
Can you talk about fostering trust, collaboration, and empowerment based on eNPS findings?
Yeah, so the eNPS system, as we've sort of described, or the AOS system that we use to really drill down into it, perks information at the top, and it perks topics and themes into focus. And when you look at those and you respond positively to those, it's very powerful. And what I mean there is, let's say, for example, the team's feeling like, I don't know, that there's not enough investment in professional development, personal development. I've talked about this a little bit because it's been a trend that I've been seeing in the organisation I'm running, and we're shifting that needle and we're moving that needle, but it is a common, been a comment, and the importance of being responsive to that and not negative or reactive is critical. So it's implementing things that acknowledge it. It's acknowledging it both openly, so in a newsletter or in a communication with the team, hey, we've gotten this feedback and we really appreciate it, and here's how we're addressing it, and here's how we intend to address it. And immediately what's happening is it's acknowledging that the feedback mechanism is working, that the feedback that's being given is actually being heard, and that there's a response to it. But just step back to the absolute ultimate outcome of all of this. We're getting feedback from team members who obviously care enough to give you that information. You're responding to it in a positive and forthright way, and the end result is more engaged team members. And what is a byproduct of that? And it is your company just makes more money, is more successful. A lot of times I've been accused of being a little bit too soft and fluffy, and I'd say people are misreading or misinterpreting my actions. my goal ultimately is for the company to be successful financially, long term. Do I make some decisions which in the short term make it less profitable? Sometimes, yeah. But I'm always looking at that long-term outcome where the company has not just the ability to produce a very powerful and profitable balance sheet, but that it has legs so that if somebody were to purchase that company, for example, they could safely step into it knowing that it's got the flywheels running, that you've got that critical mass. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens through this investment. So, I use an example. The first health club that I ever had, it had gone bust 4 times in the same location. I built a great culture. The team was amazing. We did a great job. And 3 years later, it was the most successful health club in the region. And it was going great. And we sold the club and it closed 6 months later. And that's an example of the flywheel not running. That's an example of handing over a company that didn't have legs. And so that made me really sensitive thereafter to building that internal momentum, that cultural backbone that it was hard to disassemble, even if some things changed or leadership changed or ownership changed. And that should be the ultimate goal, is to build a company that will stand the test of time.
Can you talk about aligning leadership goals with team member needs and expectations?
Well, that starts with understanding what team members' goals and expectations are. And that can start as early as the interview process, because obviously I'm interested in what are the goals and expectations of that new team member. But equally, it's constantly polling your team to understand what are they expecting, or what are they looking for, and what are their goals. And that needs to happen on a global level through something like Affinity OS, but it also needs to happen at a micro level, and I'm talking at the face-to-face individual level. It does mean that your team, your leadership team, management team, needs to be in touch with their team members and understand what those goals and expectations are. Now, sometimes those goals and expectations might be off the mark in terms of what the company wants or what the company needs. And even knowing that, there's things that you can do about it. And that's not getting rid of the person necessarily. Sometimes some of my greatest successes have been relocating people, moving them from one role into another role. And it's simply understanding what their goals and expectations were and seeing that there was a misalignment there. And in a larger organization, there's often an opportunity to move that person into a space that more aligns. So when you get people, and I talk about this in the Affinity Principle, in flow, that means that they're being challenged, but they're excited by those challenges and they're really in alignment with their best work. And that should be always our goal, but you can't initiate that without understanding the person's expectations and goals.
Let's talk about developing and retaining talent with eNPS insights. Can you talk about creating personalized learning and development plans based on eNPS feedback? So just expand a little bit more on what you've already been saying.
Yeah, so look, with the Affinity OS system, if somebody gives you feedback and they're not anonymous, it's very easy then to reach out to them and to address that. I had an example just today of a senior team member reaching out, and they were expressing some concern about a particular aspect of where they're at and, the alignment of their role. And I'm able to then really zero in. I immediately got back to the team member and we're going to meet next week. And the goal would be to explore that with them and to get more texture and context to understand exactly where they're coming from and start to build you call it a personalized plan, just something that is going to help get them into a position where they're more functional, more aligned, or maybe move their role. There's a lot of different ways this can go, but you've got to really get down to the nuts and bolts of what's driving it. There's a thing called root cause, right? And a lot of times that may not even be associated with the company. It may be associated with something that's happening outside the company. and maybe new demands on them, for example, from their family or such. You can't really help somebody and come up with this personalized sort of plan without understanding what's at the root of it. But again, you've got to build a base of trust in order for them to speak to you in a way or to a degree of truth that you can get to that root cause. So I think, just to say simply, a personalized plan to help a team member re-engage or to realign or to be closer to what they need or moving closer to what they need is only going to come with a lot of empathy, active listening, and questions are the most powerful tool in those situations, is asking just a lot of questions and actually open-ended questions. So you've really got your ears open and you're listening for context and texture. Again, it's not just what somebody says too. It's how it's delivered. So,
can you talk about promoting career progression, internal mobility, and recognition?
Yeah, so career mobility comes with people having opportunities to sometimes just move sideways, for example, to try something different within a similar vein, but sometimes move up the career ladder. I've actually seen people move down the career ladder and be happier. So, mobility means not always, moving up the ladder, if you will, but it is people exploring, and we should encourage that exploration, particularly if a person has a gift that they want to pursue. Definitely would encourage that. And promoting that sort of culture of also growing the ability for people to be flexible and to do other things. So with this sort of career progression and mobility, what you get is a lot of people that are cross-trained, and those people, because they're trained across a number of different facets, can be very versatile, and they also appreciate what goes into other roles. So there's a lot of value to that. Also, rewarding people in their progression and in their growth is critical factor. And I always argue that, and it's not me really, the numbers show that you don't have to always do that through money. A lot of times it's just people being acknowledged and getting the opportunity to try something different. I talk about flow, and flow is that space where somebody is being challenged, but they're not being stressed to the point where, it is painful. And what you're doing when you give people these opportunities to try different roles or to do different things is you're allowing them to maybe shift out of maybe complacency, which often occurs from doing a job for a long time, into a new space of being challenged, and opportunities come with that. And again, rewarding people by giving them opportunities that maybe it's a stretch or maybe it seems outside of what you might normally do. I've been so pleasantly surprised at times when people have sort of put their hands up for things. And I remember one classic example, a gentleman that I worked with who loved dearly, but he struggled in many, many different positions, and he was a very self-aware individual. And he said, I'd really like to go into sales. And he would be what you describe as the least typical salesperson ever. And I really questioned that. But to be quite honest, I'd sort of reached a point with him where I knew this guy has some magic. I just don't know how to take advantage of it. And he was spot on. And he ended up becoming the top salesperson in the company. He ended up being the sales director for the entire company. In fact, I think he's gone back to that role multiple times. He's still in that company. And so, these opportunities sometimes come from unusual places or in unusual ways. We just need to be very open to exploring and letting people explore.
Can you talk about implementing retention strategies and initiatives to reduce turnover?
Yeah, so retention strategies, I think one of the retention strategies a lot of companies use is payroll money. And, that can help, but it doesn't ameliorate people's pain points. And I think a great retention strategy is to understand people's pain points. And the Affinity OS system is designed to exactly, or to bring that into focus. And what you're getting when you get that feedback from team members is the things that are challenging them, also the things that they're loving. And that spectrum can really give you the best way to retain team members, because if you're taking the pain points away and if you're pushing up more of the things that are making their work easier, helpful, or maybe it's a team member that's helping other team members and you promote that person to have a greater influence in the company. The strategies that come from understanding what's going on with the team down at, I call it the coal phase, are critical. But when you're a very large organization with a lot of sites and a lot of team members, that's really hard to do. And the Affinity OS system was the only way that we could envision being able to do that through leveraging AI in a very tangible way. And it really just gives you a playbook. Our partner, Andrew, who is one of the lead developers, he talks about a playbook, and it's a great way to think about it. Is how do we strategize to help team members be the best that they can be?
Yeah. It's such the affinity principle, your book, is like the roadmap, and the Affinity OS system is like the GPS that's getting you there. And it's just such a great progression to help you measure and implement the strategies that you put forth in the book.
It's quite unusual to be able to leverage a premise. Now my premise in the book, the Affinity Principle, has been built over 3 decades of managing teams and growing companies and being successful in the business environment. And to be able to be a part of the development of this software platform that actually allows people to leverage that and to essentially create the best companies they can possibly create, it's pretty exciting. And I guess novel on many levels. I haven't seen a lot of software platforms that got built on the basis of a book like that. Yeah.
Let's talk about continuous improvement and long-term success with eNPS. Can you talk a little bit about setting and tracking KPIs for eNPS initiatives?
Yeah. So when things, I keep saying perk to the top, sort of bubble to the top. Those data points in Affinity OS end up in a word cloud, and that word cloud is either trends or topics. And in that word cloud, you get a lot of detail. So if we've got a big word cloud, and let's say for team members, it's maybe remuneration, right? Let's say that's a tough topic, right? And this big bubble starts growing in its remuneration. And the way it's color-coded on the word cloud, if it's red, it's bad, and if it's green, it's good, and it can be a little bit of both. And if you've got a big red word cloud that says remuneration, you probably have a problem with your remuneration. When you drop into it, you go down another level and you can see what are the subsets of that. So another word cloud appears and it looks at what are the issues around remuneration. And again, it might be just one big bubble, with a couple little bubbles that says you're not paying at market for that particular service. And maybe you know that, maybe you don't, but you can either recognize it and do some market research and go, okay, where is the market at for that particular service? And let's say it's something like, let's say massage, right? You've got a team of massage, or you've got a team that's your massage team, and it's perking to the top that across the board they're not feeling fairly remunerated. And you do your research and you realize that everybody's paying 10, 15, 20% more than you are. And if your benefits and the value of what they receive at the company beyond just their remuneration don't offset that, you either got to match it or you're going to start to lose team members. So, the trend will be, and this is a good example of what happens when you get this information prospectively, and you can do something about it, or you can't, or you don't. And if you don't do something about it, the trend will continue to grow, and you will start to see retention issues. And suddenly you're looking for massage team members, and the numbers around losing a team member, the cost of losing a skilled team member that knows their job and does their job well is about a third of their annual salary. That's the cost of not just losing them, but it's recruiting someone else, training them up and getting them to a point of productivity where they're that successful. Or as successful as the previous person. And even in this massage example, it's a great example because a lot of times a massage therapist has a book of business. People come back regularly every week or every month for a massage, and you lose that book of business because you weren't able to or didn't want to meet that market value for that person. Suddenly you're down the tubes on all that business because those people aren't going to automatically go to the next person you hire. That's not normally in that space. So I think it's a good example of what happens with these trends and how we can do something about it, or we can just sit back and hope for the best. And the bubble ultimately bursts if we just don't do anything about it.
So you set your KPIs and you set your initiatives. Obviously, then the next step would be monitoring the impact of the NPS or eNPS-driven changes on company culture and talent retention. So I would then think that continuously monitoring through a system like Affinity OS would be the answer.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't mention the KPIs. I didn't get into the KPIs.
That's all right.
But what's beautiful about eNPS or about Affinity OS and in the eNPS system is you do have measurements in there, and you can see the numbers. And so let's say, for example, in that particular space, you've got a 54% like inflection towards this negativity around remuneration, and you start to take some action about addressing it, and not just necessarily addressing it by raising the wages, in a wholesale fashion, but maybe finding a way to commission the team members to give them additional revenue as a function of their performance. It doesn't always have to be done in a way that seems, a straight line, but you see that 54% goes down to 37%, down to 24%, down to 10%. If you're effective in the management of these, the KPIs will track. But the beauty of Affinity OS is there's a lot of metrics within the system that you can look at and keep a finger on the pulse.
Yeah, so that leads into my next question, which is gathering and incorporating additional feedback for iterative improvements.
Yeah, one of the things when we built and envisaged the Affinity OS system, we built on a platform that had an immense infrastructure and the ability to literally turn this data into very salient and actionable items. And one of the things about it, if you look at it at the system holistically, is that you can drill deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper down to the individual comment and down to the individual number that was granted to you by that team member, for example, on that particular point. You can drill as deep as you want to go. And what's beautiful about that is the other side of it, that a lot of times you don't need to drill very deep. It's pretty obvious at that higher level. But if you need more context, you can get as much as you want. And that should be the same with any system. The challenge we have with data is a lot of times is I say parsing that data. So that is like really finding those inflection points and finding things within that data that are meaningful. And that's why the AI engine is so powerful and why I'm such an advocate for this system, is that it makes the manager's job easy. It makes the customer services job easy. It makes, look, it's meant to do all the hard work for you, and it should. And that's what AI is about on some level, is just, making some of that hard, laborious work happen before your very eyes.
Let's talk about developing a sustainable long-term strategy for leveraging eNPS in people-centric organizations.
So long-term strategy around this is, again, playing the long game, and meaning that when we get information, we need to watch it over time and watch what the trends are. But the long-term strategy needs to be to not treat it as wallpaper. I mean, that's one of the inevitable things that happens in organizations where they don't see the value in something. The value in the eNPS system, the AOS system, is ongoing. It's something that if you check it every day, you will get a really good sense of where your organization is at and where it's headed. And it becomes one of those bellwethers, it's one of those leads that you can't do without. So the long-term strategy for me is just being consistent and being rhythmic with this, and in turn continuing to communicate with your team and put in front of your team the facets of their feedback that will encourage them to continue to do their very best work. So it is just the discipline. It's the discipline of communication. It's a discipline of ensuring that the feedback you're getting is leveraged. And, I say AOS will do all the hard work for you. It does. It literally distills these gems into crystal form where you can see them, and then doing something about it is your job as a manager. I once heard that you wouldn't need managers if everybody did what they're supposed to do. I'm not sure that's completely accurate, but I do believe that our biggest job as a manager or leader is helping people grow, succeed, get out of their own way sometimes. And the long-term strategy or the long-term consequences of having a powerful eNPS system at your disposal is that you'll be focused, your energy will be focused in the right places, and you'll actually expend a lot less energy over time than you would if you were trying to sort of react to every bit of feedback that comes through and stay on top of it, when in actual fact, a lot of those anecdotal segments really aren't going to make a difference to how the team feels overall or the performance of the company. And your investment of time and energy is critical. So you as a leader and a manager need to understand where to best focus your time and energy, and that's the goal of the system. And the long-term strategy is really just keeping your eye on the ball.
Any final thoughts about eNPS, people-centric culture, and talent development and retention?
No, not really. Look, we talk about a lot of these topics and we overlap in a lot of our conversations in these podcasts. And if you've heard the previous podcasts, there'll be definitely things you've heard before. And then if you listen to future podcasts, there'll be definitely things in the future that will overlap as well. The truth is that if we want to be the best that we can be as a manager or a leader, and we want the organization that we lead or manage to be the best that it can be, we really need to be open to feedback, and we need to assimilate that feedback and respond to it. And if we can do that with our team members and with our customers, the financial results will come because we are being responsive. In today's business world, it's moving at such a pace that even standing still right now means you're going backwards because things are just evolving so quickly. And it's really hard for us to stay abreast of that without having very, very powerful tools to literally keep our finger on the pulse on a daily basis. And so I just reiterate that whatever you do, make sure that you've got the data coming in that you need to keep your ship steered in the right direction.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, please reach out to us on social media, and we hope you join us next time. Thank you.
Thank you.